captain, and this is before they had all the technology for radar, or they had radar, but they had some of the other things they have now. But anyway, GPS and all that. So he's captaining the ship, and so he sees this faint light, and tells the signal man, he said, send a message. The message is, alter your course 10 degrees south. And he does. He sends a message, and the return message was, alter your course 10 degrees north. The captain was mad, because you don't tell me that. So he felt like the message had been ignored, so he sent a second message. Alter your course 10 degrees south. I am a captain. Another message came back. Alter your course 10 degrees north. I am Seaman Third Class Jones. Now, this captain is furious. He's steaming because now he's got a third-class seaman that is just telling him what to do. He said immediately the captain sends a third message, knowing that it would put fear into the heart of this man. He says, alter your course 10 degrees south. I am a battleship. The reply came back, alter your course 10 degrees north. I am a lighthouse. Sometimes it's hard to submit, right? We think we're right. We think we're in the know. We think we don't want to submit, but sometimes some people have the right thing for us, a good thing for us. How many know that submission isn't very well accepted in our culture? And that's what our title is, Submit to One Another. In fact, right up here in the banner, I put a circle around it so you know, right in the middle, smack dab in the middle, somebody's wife made this banner and put submit to one another right in the middle. I don't know if that's because of importance of it or it just happened that way, but it's a good place for it because it is important. It is very important, submitting to one another. You know, and it's not very well accepted in our culture, but let me just tell you this, that if you want to mature as a Christian, if you want to have real Christian community and a family here at CFC and outside, even with people who are not part of our church family, but the Christians or followers of Jesus, learning to submit to one another is an important thing. By the way, I'm going to digress. I find this sweatshirt Kathy said was in our mailbox, and I don't know who gave it to me, but thank you, because it says Sermonator on it. If you Arnold Schwarzenegger, I must break you. Sermonator. So we're going to see if we can do some sermonating. So thank you, whoever put that there. I appreciate that. James Dobson, founder of Focus on the Family, tells a story that goes along with what I'm doing here, and talks about a Dr. Sloniker, who was a friend of his, a pediatric physician, and he had a little boy that would come into him as a patient, what do you call him, client, whatever, you know, and he came in for a checkup, and the entire staff dreaded when this boy came in because he was a monster. He would come in, and he would go after equipment, and he would go after telephones, and 10 years old, and his mom just sat there as this little boy wreaked havoc in the doctor's office, tearing things up, just total destruction, and she was just beside herself, and she just sat there passively watching this little boy. Well, one day they were examining the boy, and Dr. Sloniker saw that he had some bad teeth and knew that this boy needed to be referred to a dentist. The problem is, on a professional level, who do you refer this little Tasmanian devil to? If you watch the Looney Tunes, who do you refer this little guy to and still have a friend that's a professional? It's hard. Finally, he thinks of this elderly gentleman who was a dentist and who had his way with children. He understood kids and he worked well with kids, so he referred him to him. The mother takes the son, makes an appointment, takes the son to this elderly dentist. They go in the office and they go back and into the dental chair, and right away the dentist says, get in the chair, young man. Robert says, no chance. Son, the dentist says, son, I told you to climb in the chair, and that's what I intend you to do. Robert stared at his opponent. He took this as a challenge for a moment, and then he said, if you make me get in that chair, I'm going to take off all my clothes. The dentist calmly said, like I would say, then go ahead, take off all your clothes. The little boy took his shirt off, took his undershirt off, took his shoes off, took his socks off. He looks defiantly at this dentist. See, I'm taking my clothes off. Dentist says, all right, son, now get in the chair. The little boy said, maybe you didn't understand me. If you make me get into that chair, I will take off all my clothes. I heard you, said the dentist. Go ahead and take them off. So the little boy, he stripped down all his glory there before the dentist and his assistant. And Dr. Sloniger says, okay, now get in the chair. The boy climbs in the chair, and he's totally cooperative as they go through everything they had to do with the drilling and the filling and everything. And he's all done, and after he's done, the little boy hops down. He said, now can I have my clothes back? The dentist said, I'm sorry. You're not getting your clothes back. You go tell your mom that you can have your clothes back tomorrow. We're keeping them till tomorrow. So this little boy is now walking out from the dentist's exam room to the waiting room, and he gets to the waiting room door, and he opens the waiting room door, and he's in his birthday suit. He's in all his glory, and his mom is sitting there, and there's his little boy, 10-year-old little boy with nothing on. And the room is full of, can you just imagine your child, and you're waiting for your child, and they come out like this. You would just be like, ah! The mother parades her buck-naked little son through the office and out into the parking lot and into the car, and they go home. The next day, the mom comes back and to get his clothes. And she says, can I have a word with the dentist? She's not mad. She's not angry or anything. In fact, the dentist comes out and says, yes, what can I do for you? She said, you don't know how much I appreciate what you did here yesterday. You see, my son, Robert, has been blackmailing me about taking off all his clothes in places we go, and if he doesn't get what he wants, he's going to do that. And so I always give in. We go to a grocery store, and he wants candy, and I say no, and he threatens to take off his clothes, and I've just been giving in. And if I don't do what he wants, he just keeps threatening me that way. And you're the first person who called his bluff. The impact on Robert has been incredible. I tell that story because sometimes we're like Robert. You know, we want to do whatever is necessary to get our way. Some people do that. Some people work that way. I want my way at work. Maybe they're the boss. I'm the boss, and I said so, and this is the way. And the thing is, sometimes it spills over into the church. The attitude of, I want my way, and I'm going to do whatever it takes. I don't care who I walk over, who I run over, and it spills over into the church. In fact, most church fights and splits, or many church fights and splits, seem to happen because people don't want to give in to one another. They usually insist that this is important. This is important. We can't do this. This is important. This is important to our church, and we can't give that. There once was a church in Indiana back in the 30s. I think it was the 30s. An old conservative Mennonite church. They had a church split. The split was because one group of people wanted Sunday school class. And other people said their church didn't have Sunday school. We don't do that here. That's for the heathens. Those Presbyterians do that sort of thing. We don't do that here. Had a church split. Now, we can look back at it and say, how silly is that? You know, I would have probably walked it down and said, no, wait a minute. You don't want to have an additional time for people to get into God's Word and learn more about what God's Word has for us. That's what I would have walked it back. But it didn't happen that way. It became the missionary church, became an offshoot of that, consequently. So that worked out for them. But it's true. You know, usually people insist something is important at stake, and they're fighting over this sacred principle that they can't get over. We always put the casseroles at this end, you know, and we look and we say, how goofy is that? How goofy is that? And it's, that's just how it is. And sometimes it's true. Sometimes things are worth fighting for, but sometimes they're not. A lot of times it really comes down to pick your battle, right? Pick the battle. So there's just some things that aren't worth the battle, and some things not worth doing it. And often we give in because we give in because it means giving in. We don't give in because it means giving in. We wouldn't get our own way. Usually our threat isn't like Robert's taking off our clothes. Don't do that, okay? But sometimes it's just as foolish. And all we want to do is take our ball and go home. And unfortunately in the church, sometimes people threaten to leave and never come back, or they threaten to leave and take others with them. I remember one time I was sitting in a church meeting and somebody was upset about something, and they walked out, and I walked out after them, and they were talking to me about this, and I basically caught them in a lie. And I said, what you said is untrue. That you lied to all those people back in the meeting. And I said, if this other person said they're going to leave, and you may think that this is brash of me, but I said, because I really felt like as a church family we're doing the right thing, I said, don't let the door hit him in the backside on the way out. Because we're not going to put up with that type of thing, but we are going to submit to one another in love and care and type of thing. We're not going to let people hold us hostage because they want to take their clothes off. They're ready to take their clothes off if we don't do, and Daryl, don't go there. Don't go there. So anyway, question is, how do we as a church avoid these immature attitudes and behaviors in the church? And the answer is simple. We learn to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. In fact, that's our text. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. That's one that's so short, so powerful, yet so easy to remember. I think every one of us could remember that text. Right. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Even Steve Miller could remember that text. Yeah. I'm just Steve knows I always poke at him. But no, let's say this together because it's so easy. Let's say it together. Ready? Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. See that? Ephesians 5:21. Very easy. That's the entire text. In fact, the New American Standard says this: be subject to one another in the fear of Christ. And the New King James says, submitting to one another in the fear of God. Submission, as you look at it in the Bible, is basically synonymous with obedience. It basically means to yield to one another's admonition and advice. I talked about admonishing one another last week. You see it in Bible, submission, being subject to one another, and the inference of being subject to one another in the Bible, along with things like servanthood, topics of humility, of respect, of reverence, of honor, of being teachable. And all those things have one basic purpose, and that is to make us obedient to Jesus. That's what we need to do, being obedient to Jesus, being submissive to him and his will. The concept of submission, in fact, is used in the Bible by biblical writers to describe Christian relationships. Zeke referred to these kind of at his opening remarks. It's like, wives, submit to your husbands, Ephesians 5:22. That's a tough one. I actually had somebody come to me one time and said, Tim, where's that verse in the Bible about making my wife submit to me? I said, you don't want to go down that road. you don't want to do this one because you're not ready for this one. Anyway, but that's in the Bible, Ephesians 5:22, as well as 1 Peter 3:6. Children are admonished to submit to their parents. Christians are commanded to submit to leaders in the church. Now, I do want to say that in order to make, like last week, I give you one side, I got to give you the other side as well. Because people in authority are commanded to lead with a submissive attitude as well. Husbands, well, it says, wives, submit to your husbands. That's not the whole story. More of the story goes, husbands, love your wife just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her. Now, I'm going to ask wives, or anybody, submitting to somebody else, whether it's a wife to a husband or a man to another man, as far as whatever, if that person cares for you just as Jesus cared for the church, loved the church, gave himself up for it, submitting to that person is not that hard, is it? If that person has the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, if that person exhibits those things, submitting to that person isn't that hard because that person's genuine. That person loves you. That person's peaceful. That person's gentle. That person's living under self-control. We know that those things are happening in that person's life, so it's not that hard. But also the Bible talks about, in Ephesians, about fathers dealing justly with the children. Do not provoke your children to anger, it says. Or elders are exhorted to be servant leaders. And the list of both of these sides could go on of who he's supposed to be submissive to, but how leaders and people in authority are supposed to be submissive as well and how they're supposed to lead. But this attitude of this concept of complete mutual submission actually was made possible by Jesus. As we look at his life, when he came to the world, he brought a whole new approach to how relationships should be. In the Gentile world, there was no such thing as mutual submission. Gentiles didn't do that. They didn't submit to each other. For example, one day when Jesus' disciples were arguing about who's going to be the greatest, what Jesus say to them? He says this. He says, Jesus called them to him and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. See, all believers, even people with authority, have the need to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. There are just some things that are not worth the battle. And when we see Jesus doing it, I mean, think about it. In John 1, we see Jesus was there at the beginning of all things. He's the one who laid the foundations of the world. He's the Lord of the universe, right? Jesus, the Lord of the universe, which means he has authority over everything. When we see him do it, he become a servant to all. We say we need to also. Paul said this about Jesus. He said, have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped. But he emptied himself, taking on the form of a bondservant, being made in the likeness of men, you and me, human beings, and being found in the appearance as a man. What did he do? He humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. It was Paul who gave us the command to submit to one another. He even puts it into practice in his own life. You read the book of Acts. Luke's the author of Acts, and Luke is telling the story in Acts 21 how Paul, after his third missionary journey, is coming back to Jerusalem, and how he's meeting with James and the other elders, and how he says what happened on this missionary journey, and all the people, all the Gentiles that came to Christ, and they all celebrate, and they think it's great. But they go on to say, but the thing is, Paul, we got word that you're telling the Jewish converts, the Jewish Christians, that they can no longer, celebrate their Jewish traditions, their law, celebrate their holidays because they're now Christians. We got word about that. And what are we going to do, Paul? What's going to happen when these people find out that you're here? They know that you're here. See, the rumors had spread to Jerusalem about Paul saying these things and saying they had to give up these customs and these practices. And that posed a threat for Jewish Christians. I mean, it may be hard for us to wrap our mind around it, but let's try this. It'd be a little bit like you and I as Christians having somebody say, all Christians in America, since you believe in God, you're not allowed to observe the nation's holidays, which is 4th of July. You can't do that. You can't observe President's Day. You can't observe Veterans Day. You can't observe also the Constitution. That's out. You can't follow the Constitution. That's what it would be like. It's not a perfect analogy, but for the Jews and their religious heritage, it's all intertwined. I sat with a Jewish man once on the way home from Israel, and I asked him about, because I think of Jewish people and I think religion. He said, you have to understand, not all Jewish people are religious Jews. Light bulb goes on. Oh, a lot of people say America's a Christian nation. Not all Americans are Christian, right? And so that's what it's like. And what they hear Paul saying is, you can't observe these customs, these things that are important to you for your religion. You can't do that anymore. And he wasn't saying that. So when they got to Jerusalem, Paul was telling the Jewish Christians to give up those customs. That was a problem. That's what they thought about. It's a false rumors. So the elders in Jerusalem had a suggestion for Paul. They said, do therefore what we tell you. We have 4 men who are under a vow. Let me just quickly say, the vow was a Nazirite vow. Samson was under a Nazirite vow. Other people, Samuel was under a Nazirite vow at one time. So the Nazirite vow was something that was taken. It was for a specific period of time that they said they would be under this vow. And it goes on to say, take these men with you, take these men and purify yourself along with them and pay their expenses. So this vow is an expensive vow. What would happen oftentimes so that the poor people could also make this vow, and this vow was to be totally in everything subjected to God. In everything you do. And they would not shave their hair. That's why Samson had his long hair. They would leave things grow. They would not eat certain foods. They abstained from that just so they could be focused on God for a period of time. And then it was expensive, so they'd ask somebody who has the wealth, who has the money, to pay this expense for somebody as a symbol of piety on that person's part. So they may shave their head. Thus, all will know that there is nothing in what you have been told has been told about you, but that you yourself also live in observance of the law. So basically, Paul, listen, go and help these guys out. Do this. And Paul even made the same kind of vow in Acts, back in Corinthians, in Acts 18. He said, go do this, bring an end to the vow, pay for it. People will know that you're the real deal and that these rumors are false. It'll be okay. That's what Paul was asked to do. So the question is, would Paul do it? The question is, does he do it? And think about this. That's you. You know the rumors are false. You know they're saying things that aren't false. You know that you've got nothing to do with that. You know that nothing is true. Why would you have to submit yourself to that expense? Why pay this money out? It was hard for Paul anyway. He could have pulled rank as an apostle, couldn't he? He could have said, wait a minute, I'm an apostle. You can't do that to me. It's a lie. I don't want to have to give into that lie. What's he do? Look at verse 26. Then Paul took the men, and the next day he purified himself along with them, and went into the temple, giving notice when the days of purification would be fulfilled, and the offering presented for each one of them. What's Paul do? He submits. Now, Luke doesn't tell us why Paul did this, but I think he does it for unity in the church. You know, he could have said, it's my right. I'm not wrong in this. Those people are lying about me. It's not true. He could have said that. But he was willingly set aside being right and defending himself for the higher good of the church. How many know you got to pick your battles, and sometimes these battles aren't worth the fight. They're just not worth doing. He submitted himself to others out of reverence for Christ. So let's get to the takeaways now. Let's look at what submission is and what it isn't. And so on your notes, the back of your scripture sheets, first of all, mutual submission is not about being a doormat. It's not about being a doormat. We don't submit to one another because we have no rights and we are lesser than other people. I don't submit to other people because they're greater, they're more important or whatever. We don't do that, you know. That's not how we are. Richard Foster, author of Celebration of Discipline. If you've never read it, the book was written back in the 80s. Great book. I encourage you to read it. Celebration of Discipline. Richard Foster says this: Jesus called us to self-denial without self-hatred. Self-denial is simply a way of coming to understand that we do not have to have it our own way. Our happiness is not dependent upon getting what we want. Amen to that. Self-denial does not mean the loss of our identity, as some suppose. Without our identity, we could not even be subject to each other. Did Jesus lose his identity when he set his face toward Golgotha? Did Peter lose his identity when he responded to Jesus' cross-bearing command, follow me? Did Paul lose his identity when he committed himself to the one who said, I will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name? Of course not. We know the opposite was true. They found their identity in the act of self-denial. So submission is really an act of love for God, for others, and ourselves. Submission is not it's not loving to allow someone to abuse us in one way or another. At some point, you have to draw the line. But it's also not about being a doormat either. Second, mutual submission means putting other people first. It's an attitude of giving in, of working together, of doing what's the best for others. Kathy and I were talking about this the other night, and she gave me an analogy, and I don't know, I probably won't say it quite as well as she told me the other night, but her analogy was, it's like in a sport team, her volleyball team, she had to have a captain. The captain usually was a person who understood the game, a person who had leadership ability, a person who played well usually, was respected by other players. That's the type of person who was a captain. But also you could have other players on the team who, there may be somebody who's a better player than the captain. But what's crucial for the other players to be followers, to be people who submit themselves to the leading of the captain, right? Otherwise, it doesn't work for the team. I don't know if that was right, if I'm close or not, but close enough, and she'll tell me where I made a mistake later. Just for my benefit, not for my benefit. Ultimately, submission, understand, flows out of our strength, not our weaknesses. That's where it comes from. In John 13, when Jesus washed his disciples' feet, it says that he knew who he was, and therefore he made himself their servant. Jesus knew how great he was. He knew how special he was, and that's why he could stoop to wash their feet. He understood that he was there at the creation of all things. He understood that he was the Son of God, God in the flesh. It's God who gives you and me the supernatural spiritual strength to live in submission to one another. So, why is submission so important? 2 reasons. Number 1, first reason is that it fosters freedom. Real freedom, people, is not in always being right. I had Ben Kingren came up to me afterwards at Nobbaway, and he said, "Tim, you don't understand the burden I have to carry, that I try to lay down." I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, I have the burden of always being right." He says, "I'm always right about everything, and it's really hard for me." We joked about that a little bit, but real submission is not having that burden, is laying it down and knowing that I don't have to always be right. I don't have to get my own way. Again, Richard Foster says, the obsession to demand that things go the way we want them to go is one of the greatest bondages in human society today. People will spend weeks, months, and even years in a perpetual stew because some little thing did not go as they wished. They'll fuss and fume. They'll get mad about it. They'll act as if their very life hangs on the issue. They may even get an ulcer over it. In the discipline of submission, we're released to drop the matter, to forget it. Frankly, the most things in life are not nearly so important as we think they are. Our lives will not come to an end if this or that will not happen. Isn't that true? You're going to get up tomorrow. There is another day for you to, unless the Lord decides to call you home. But generally speaking, we are going to get up tomorrow. We are going to have another day. My ball team, winning or losing, doesn't make a difference. Those guys don't even know me. This person running for office, honestly, doesn't really make a direct difference to me or you, generally speaking. So submission leads to freedom when we can lay things down and say, I don't have to go that way. Secondly, submission is the heart of Christianity. It's the heart of Christianity. Martin Luther said this: "A Christian is the most free lord of all and subject to no one. A Christian is the most dutiful servant of all and subject to everyone." You can't go through the New Testament without coming across the call to lay aside our desires, and at times for the good of Christ and others. Jesus said, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must," what? "Deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." In Paul's life, talking about his own life, he said, Though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone. To win why? To win as many as possible. To the Jews, I become a Jew, to win the Jews. To those under the law, I become one like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law. So as to win those under the law. People learning to submit to one another in love and out of reverence for Christ is the best thing we can do for ourselves, for others, and to Jesus. It's the best thing we can do. I told him at Nobbaway today that I passed, Dean Broadberg, treasurer, asked for our wish list, so to speak, for 2020, and so I gave him my list of things I wanted, but I want them to understand that they can say no. Church council can say no to Tim. The elders can say no to me. People can say no to me, and I willingly submit to that. I really do. But I usually say that I've thought about it, I processed it, so if you're going to say no, you better have a good reason to say no, so we can, at least have a good conversation about it. Just to say no is not valid, right? But we do that. We submit to one another to make the church the best church it can be. So may God's Spirit move in you and me in such a way that it molds us, it shapes us, it makes us more and more like Jesus, who had a submissive spirit. And no matter who we are, we have to learn to submit to God, to authorities, and to each other, no matter who we are. Like I told him at Nobbin Way, if battleships are wise, they'll submit to the lighthouse. And so will we.